Hi everybody, my name is Dr. Megan Lax and welcome back to our third episode of Tailboard Talk, checking in with GFR. If I haven't had a chance to introduce myself to you yet, I'm actually a clinical assistant professor with ECU Family Medicine and a licensed marriage and family therapist. And right now, GFR and ECU Family Medicine actually have a great collaboration to work together. And that includes some kind of more formal trainings that we were hosting at the EOC before COVID happened, where we would go over some common mental health or behavioral health issues that first responders are challenged with, and kind of go over some brief interventions related to those things. And then we also had some of our staff riding along with you all, going on calls and just kind of helping just be present in the stations with you all if you had concerns come up or questions come up, and it allowed our team to have some perspective about what it's like to be a first responder day in and day out. So that was kind of what the grant collaboration consisted of before COVID happened. And now, due to COVID precautions, we've had to alter our training a little bit. And so what we're doing is we're kind of posting these short, brief videos for you all, hopefully on topics that are relatable and relevant to things that you're going through. So this is our way of kind of staying connected with you while we can't be with you in person. So we've done a couple of these already. The first one was right after kind of the quarantine and shutdown happened. And so we talked about some brief strategies and tips to kind of help deal with that kind of stressor. The second one, we talked more specifically about anxiety and different techniques for managing anxiety. And so, of course, you all have access to those videos or those links. Those are all on YouTube, so you can watch them anytime. And so today, we're going to talk about something a little bit different, and we're going to focus on sleep. Sleep, I think, is a really tricky conversation to have with first responders because, you know, it's something really common and it's something that you can't control. And so I think a lot of times when we feel like we're working in places or our life for whatever reason doesn't kind of allow us to have control over a certain thing that's happening to us, we feel kind of helpless and don't really kind of want to or think about being able to make changes to better our life, you know, in whatever way that you feel like is impacted. And so I am here, and if you've been to any of my trainings before, hopefully this is kind of a common theme, that I'm really here to kind of challenge some of that and to say that just because you're a first responder, just because you work a job over the night or through the night, doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice your quality of life or sacrifice your physical or mental health. And so I'm going to kind of carry on with that theme today and talking about sleep. I wanted to open up, I have a couple quotes kind of throughout here today, but I wanted to open it up with this quote from a firefighter out in Denver, Colorado. So he actually and his wife have created kind of a protocol, I guess, for kind of helping, a program for helping kind of improve sleep for first responders. And so I thought this quote would be really relevant as we kind of start our conversation today about sleep. So let me just go ahead and read this. Running calls while the rest of the world is asleep is inherently part of the job. No scheduled preference will alter the nature of the emergency services. But I'm not here to debate whether a 24 or 48-hour schedule is better. I'm not here to debate factors out of our control, such as night runs. I'm here to inform on a rising health crisis and to spread awareness that sleep loss is not an insurmountable problem. There are surprisingly viable, proven solutions that we can implement within the demands of any firefighter schedule to mitigate the effects of sleep deprivation and improve the quality of sleep you receive on or off shift, regardless of how little it is. I thought this quote was perfect to kind of open our conversation because, again, we're not saying that we can make these big structural changes in your job or that we have any control over how much sleep you get while you're on shift. But what we are saying is there's major concerns about having sleep deprivation over a long period of time. And there are little things that we can do to kind of help improve our sleep, whether we're on shift or off. And so hopefully that conversation will get started today and will kind of help if you're feeling like you want to make some changes to your sleep routine or have been feeling kind of helpless and have kind of given in to the idea that you're a firefighter or you're a first responder, that you're just going to have to deal with poor sleep the rest of your life. Hopefully, this will shed light and you'll start to kind of question that and wonder if there are other things that you can do to kind of help improve your sleep. So to kind of start off here, I have done a topic with you all on sleep before. So if you attended that, some of these statistics might sound pretty familiar, but I always think that repetition is a good thing. And so even if you did attend that, hopefully kind of hearing this information again will still be helpful to you. So we know that firefighters often identify sleep disturbance as their primary stressor. And I think we could probably change firefighters to probably just first responders in general, but this particular study was looking specifically at firefighters. So poor sleep is often rated as a more prevalent problem than drinking behaviors, smoking, and caffeine use. In one particular study, nearly 40% of firefighters met criteria for at least one sleep disorder. The reason that I have that in italics is because there's certain criteria that has to be met for someone to meet criteria for a sleep disorder. So that's pretty significant. So we're not talking about someone who's just having general sleep problems or would kind of indicate themselves that they're having poor sleep or that they're very tired or anything like that. There's certain criteria that 40% of these firefighters met, which is pretty significant when we're talking about kind of a specific disorder and kind of meeting criteria for that. So 80% of those 40% had no prior awareness of their disorder. So almost half the firefighters met criteria, and a significant majority had no idea that they met criteria for a disorder or that what the kind of problem behaviors that could go along with that. Also, firefighters with sleep disorders were more likely to report cardiovascular disease, depression, diabetes, anxiety, and a host of other kind of chronic health conditions. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we're kind of going through today, just kind of the ramifications of sleep loss and sleep deprivation. So the most common sleep disorders among first responders are sleep apnea, shift work disorder, circadian rhythm disorder, and then insomnia. So sleep apnea is the primary sleep disorder impacting firefighters. The reason, that's probably not surprising to most of you if you're in the stations and you're listening to other people and you all are kind of open about those who are kind of dealing with sleep apnea. But what's significant about this is that even though it's a primary sleep disorder, over an 8-year period, men in particular with severe sleep apnea are almost 60% more likely to develop congestive heart failure. So we know that there are a lot of health conditions that impact first responders. We know that sleep apnea is a really common sleep disorder among first responders, and we know that it has an impact on congestive heart failure. And so I think all of these kind of connections are really important for us to kind of pause and say, what can we do differently to make sure that we're taking care of the physical and mental health of our personnel? We also know that many EMS clinicians are already at increased risk of health problems that are related to sleep deprivation. So for example, about 75% of EMS personnel are classified as overweight or obese, and about 50% of EMS clinicians report being told by a physician that they have at least one health condition. So that could be something like hypertension, diabetes, anything like that. So this is pretty significant. So not only are we talking about a population that is dealing with a lot of stress just because of the nature of your job and the nature of kind of the sleep deprivation, but there's also these other kind of increase in health problems and risk factors that make layering that with sleep deprivation even more difficult and challenging. And important for us to recognize to figure out how we can kind of make some changes and improve people's quality of life and health overall. So a couple, we've talked a lot about kind of the physical ramifications of sleep deprivation, which is typically seen as less than 6 or 7 hours of sleep a night on a regular basis, and how that can impact lots of different areas and systems of our body over a long period of time. And so some of the other impacts of sleep loss are first responders are susceptible to never entering the REM phase of sleep. And so this phase is responsible particularly for processing emotionally heightened events. And I have that highlighted here because given the nature of your jobs, you are responding to and you're involved in emotionally heightened events a lot. And so that can look very different. And that doesn't necessarily mean trauma, but that just means that a lot of the calls that you go on and the different things that you're trying to manage and work through can be emotionally heightened. And so as an individual becomes sleep deprived, the brain center for rational decision making turns off. When the prefrontal cortex, which is the brain center for rational decision making, turns off, the emotional centers of the brain become dysregulated, and over time can be overtaken by impulsive, irrational decisions. And so again, this just kind of goes to show not only does it have an impact on our physical health in terms of our heart health and other kind of organ systems, but also just kind of how our body and how our brains are processing, you know, stressful events that are happening throughout the day. We might not be processing those as well as we could be if we're not getting that sleep that we need. So we're not surprised at all that first responders have poor sleep, right? The reasons are numerous. So first responders often work long shifts, up to 24 hours, and at odd times. The use of overtime is really common to increase income among first responders. And then many first responders supplement income with part-time jobs. So even if they're not working overtime, they're also doing other jobs, and those other jobs might be other jobs that have odd hours and long, you know, odd and long hours. And so there's lots of opportunity for missed sleep in kind of the EMS world. Another kind of problem that we see a lot with first responders is that their home and life responsibilities can play a huge role in sleep issues. And so, for example, if you've had a rough night and you had a lot of calls and you go home and you're really hoping to kind of go to sleep when you get home, but you get there and you have children that are there and have different needs, and you have a partner that's there and has different needs, or maybe parents or other family members or roommates, or lots of distractions can be happening when you get home because the rest of the world is just now waking up and getting on kind of with their day. And so when you're walking into that, it can be hard to be able to kind of put yourself, you know, in a position where you can get some good sleep and make up for the sleep that you lost the night before. Other things that can play a role in that at home are if you have a poor sleep environment, again, kind of having family obligations. So there's lots of things that are happening at home where we might not be able to just come home and nap or get the sleep that we need to kind of make up for the lost sleep that night. And so hopefully we will be able to kind of talk about some ways to kind of manage that today. So this is a quote that I think is really important. It was specifically talking about first responders. And so what this provider is saying is normalizing chronic sleep loss is a mortal addiction. It's taking out our members one life at a time. A chronic lack of sleep contributes to various biological changes that ultimately lead to disease development, independent of primary sleep disorders. Chronic sleep deficiency is causal in the development and exacerbation of cardiovascular and metabolic diseases, and ultimately a shortened lifespan. So what we're saying here, again, is kind of going back to this notion that just kind of normalizing and accepting that we have poor sleep, we're not going to get sleep because of the nature of our jobs, is really, really, like she's saying, a mortal addiction. It's an addiction. It's a mindset that's doing nothing but kind of creating more hardship on our body and our brains and on our life in general. And so it's just time for us to kind of pause and reflect on our sleep. And if we have that kind of mindset that it is what it is, then maybe we need to start to challenge that, because again, my goal is to try to improve the physical and mental health and quality of life of personnel. And so this is something that I think is a good way to kind of start talking about that. So this is a quick, what we call the Epworth Sleepiness Scale. And what this does is it kind of just measures in general someone's kind of daytime sleepiness in particular. So this isn't measuring insomnia or any of kind of a specific sleep disorder. It's just kind of a good starting point to see like how tired is someone during the day. That daytime sleepiness that could be indicative of maybe having chronic sleep deprivation. And so just for fun, I wanted us to kind of look at this. And so their score, I think, goes from 0 to 24. And the higher your score is, the more likely you are to kind of suffer from daytime sleepiness, which probably means that you're not getting a lot of sleep on a regular basis at night. And is kind of some pause. Again, I'm going to keep saying this, but just to kind of pause and reflect on what that means for your life and if that's something that you'd like to change. So as you can see here, and you can pause this video if you're really interested in wanting to kind of look over this for yourself. But just going through each of these categories, and you're going to think about, is this something that you would never doze off during, maybe a slight chance of dozing, a moderate chance of dozing, or a high chance of dozing. And so you can see these activities listed here on the left side: sitting and reading, watching television, sitting inactive in a public place, as a passenger in a car for an hour, lying down to rest in the afternoon, sitting and talking to someone, sitting quietly after lunch, sitting in a car while stopped for a few minutes during traffic. And so kind of going through that and rating each of those activities can really give us a good idea for what your daytime sleepiness is like. And, you know, if there's cause for concern and if maybe we need to make some behavioral changes to your sleep routine to kind of help improve that so that you're not as tired during the day. So getting into kind of what can we do? So we're talking about, we know it's important, we know it's a problem in our community, being able to get good sleep and in our culture. So what can we do about it? So some of the things to kind of think about or consider that might be impacting your sleep. And I'm thinking beyond shift. Now, there are things that you can do, of course, if you're having a hard time sleeping while on shift, but particularly what I'm concerned about is when you're home, when you're in your home environment, are you having difficulty sleeping? And if you are, that feels more concerning to me because that's when you should be catching up on some of the sleep that you might have missed on shift. And so are there some changes or some things that we can consider when you're at home and should be getting good sleep or restful sleep that we can kind of make some changes too? So we don't have a lot of control over what happens when we're on shift, but we do have control over what happens at home. And so if you notice as we're talking through any of these things that maybe there's something about your home environment or sleep environment at home that you'd like to change, you know, that might be worth considering. So your sleep environment is really, really important. So is there something in the environment, like a poor mattress, that makes it harder to begin or maintain sleep? Or maybe it's a temperature, maybe it's too hot, or maybe it's too cold, maybe it's too loud, maybe it's too bright. You know, are there certain things in your sleep environment that are making it difficult for you to relax? Sleep hygiene, and hygiene is really, really important. So this is just, there are really common techniques that make it easier for us to relax and to be able to fall asleep. And so some of these things are, do you have a regular sleep and wake time? Do you kind of have a schedule of when you go to bed? Do you have a bedtime routine that you use regularly so that your brain and your body, they're kind of getting wired to know it's getting time for bed now? Is your bedroom reserved for sleeping? This is really, really important. A lot of times people are doing lots of different things in their bed. So they're reading, they're playing on their phone, they're on their laptop, they're doing work, you know, they're watching TV, you know, there's lots of different things happening in your bed. And what the experts say is that you should only be using your bed for sleep and for sex, because you only want your brain to know that when you're in bed, only those activities are going to take place. And so when we're in our bed and we're watching TV or we're on our phone or on our computer, it's really hard for our brain to kind of make the connection that it's rest time and time to go to bed. And so kind of setting that boundary, if you're having a hard time falling asleep, really kind of setting that boundary of doing those activities in a different room in your house or even outside of your bed, even if it's in your bedroom, can be really helpful. Also, of course, this one seems obvious, but your use of alcohol or caffeine. So obviously, if you're trying to go to sleep, kind of monitoring how much caffeine you're drinking throughout the day and how late you're drinking caffeine. And then also alcohol. A lot of times people think that alcohol helps them fall asleep, but really alcohol might help you fall asleep, but it doesn't help you maintain sleep. And so kind of considering your alcohol use and if that could be impacting your ability to get good sleep at home. Also medications, there are common medications out there that could potentially impact your sleep. And so considering if you've just started taking a new medication and then now you're having kind of insomnia, you're having a hard time falling or staying asleep, you know, it could be a side effect from one of those medications. Also thinking about other sleep disorders. And so people that have sleep apnea, have complaints of insomnia, or restless leg syndrome can also cause insomnia. So kind of thinking about other conditions that you might already have that could also be impacting the type of sleep that you're getting. And then also other medical or behavioral health disorders, of course. So have you been diagnosed with any other common disorders that could interfere with sleep, you know, especially things like depression or anxiety? Oftentimes people that have anxiety have a really difficult time sleeping at night because their brain is, and they're having kind of racing thoughts and it's hard for them to turn their brain off is kind of how they describe it. So if you're having kind of any of those concerns, of course, those things are going to impact your ability to relax and rest and get good sleep. And so those are just things to kind of consider if you're experiencing any of those things. Those are things that we could make changes to kind of help impact and improve your sleep while you're at home. So some other kind of organizational recommendations just to kind of talk about what some of the research is discussing. So we know that shift work is a necessity for certain occupations. Again, we're not saying that we can't have shift work or that people shouldn't be working overnight. That's not at all what the argument is here. The argument is just that we need to acknowledge that there's a problem and that there are practical solutions. So there's a problem in sleep deprivation and what it does to our mind and bodies, but there are also solutions to that. And so we need to also consider those. So the National Association of State EMS Officials conducted a study to provide recommendations on sleep deprivation and fatigue among EMS personnel. And they had 5 recommendations that they kind of landed on at the end of this study. And these are the 5 that they suggest. They suggest that organizations use fatigue and sleepiness surveys to measure and monitor personnel fatigue. And so continuously kind of monitoring using kind of quantitative data to see how personnel are feeling and kind of being able to measure their sleepiness. Limit EMS shifts to less than 24 hours in duration. Provide EMS personnel access to caffeine to help stave off fatigue. Allow EMS personnel the opportunity to nap while on duty. And provide education and training in fatigue risk management to EMS personnel. So those are the recommendations that they came up with as an organization to kind of help support and mitigate the risks that are associated with sleep deprivation. And we didn't talk much about this today, but if you are interested, there's a lot of interesting data out there that talks about sleep deprivation and its impact on your ability to do your job, right? And so particularly for EMS and for firefighters. So if you're interested in kind of learning more about those specific risks, please let me know and I can get you that information. So some additional organizational recommendations are to rotate firefighter paramedics from the engine to an ambulance every 12 hours. Also talking about how services shouldn't restrict sleeping times. And so that's kind of as an above recommendation as well, as kind of allowing personnel the opportunity to sleep while they're on duty. And then also just kind of creating a good sleep environment in sleeping quarters. And so either having fans or white noise available in sleeping quarters to kind of help if personnel want to take a nap or going to bed, kind of how to help improve that environment for them while they're on shift. Now, when we're kind of stepping away from organizational factors, because a lot of us don't have control over organizational factors, there are a lot of things that you can do individually to kind of help even while you're on shift. And so napping, of course, there's a lot of content on this slide, but this is a video, so feel free to pause it and read through it. And then email me if you have specific questions about any of this information. But napping, of course, I think everybody can kind of agree that napping can be really helpful to kind of improve our alertness, vigilance, reaction times, and decrease accidents during night shift work. But it's important to kind of consider how you're napping, right? So operational naps should be short, no longer than 30 minutes, to prevent sleep inertia. So if you're taking a nap while on shift, that can be really helpful if they're less than 30 minutes. And then if possible, strategically timing them to coincide with periods of increased sleepiness. So between 2 and 5 a.m. or between 2 and 5 p.m. Having naps during those times can be particularly helpful. So caffeine, low doses of caffeine administered at certain times has been shown to reduce sleepiness during night shift and enhance performance during the first 2 nights of a block of night shifts and not disrupt daytime sleep. So this is important because a lot of people probably are already using caffeine. And I think it's helpful to know that a lot of times we see kind of a U-curve with caffeine. So it's not that the more caffeine we have, the more alert we are. Oftentimes there's a point where that begins to not be as effective. And so as you can see, kind of low doses of caffeine at certain times can be more helpful than just increasing caffeine over and over and over again throughout your shift. And then we know that the combination of napping and caffeine can help kind of with some of the negative symptoms associated with shift work. So napping of 2 to 2.5 hours in addition to 300 milligrams of caffeine is more effective at improving alertness and performance compared to just caffeine or just naps alone. So again, these are just things to consider, and these are things that you're likely already doing, but there is some evidence and some research out there to support that behavior. So if it's working for you, that's great. Also, exercise, of course, this is no surprise to anybody who's in a health field, that regular exercise has a positive impact on sleep and also kind of the health challenges that are associated with sleep deprivation. And so if you're not getting regular exercise while you're on shift or while you're at home, and that's something that you want to start, it could be helpful with your sleep patterns while you're on shift and at home, and that can be really helpful. Of course, protecting sleep times. We've talked about this a little bit, and I know this one is probably the trickiest one because it includes other people. But partners and family need to be aware of your work schedule in order to keep your environment conducive to sleep. So coming home, if you've had kind of a long night where you haven't been able to get much sleep, communicating that to your family or communicating that to whoever you live with, and making sure that they understand, I had a rough night, I need to rest from this time to this time, like please just give me that space. So that when you come home, they're aware of that and you're not being bombarded by questions and stories and all of these things because your family missed you while you were gone. And so you need to kind of prioritize getting rest when you get home, and then be able to communicate to your family or to your partner that you need that sleep and that you need that time, and to set that boundary so that you can protect that time to make up some of the sleep that you've lost. Also, using kind of things in your environment to block outside noise. So maybe that's having fan or a white noise machine or earplugs or eye masks, or just making sure that you're sleeping in a dark room, especially if we're talking about taking a nap during the day, or trying to get that sleep back when you get home in the morning after shift. And making sure that your environment, not only is your family aware that you're trying to catch up on sleep, but also that your environment is conducive to that. So making sure, again, that you're blocking out any light so that you're kind of keeping your circadian rhythm in check, and your body knows it's not time to wake because it's not seeing sunlight or daylight. And then blocking out any other noise that can be distracting to you, such as using like a white noise machine or a fan or something like that, so that you can kind of focus on just getting rest and relaxing. And then lastly, if you feel like you've been struggling with sleep for a long, long time, and you've tried lots of different things, you've tried all the techniques that we're talking about and nothing has ever worked, CBTI is kind of an evidence-based approach to managing insomnia. And this is kind of a more formal treatment, but it's not super long, it's not super complicated. So if you have questions about kind of something more specific, tailored treatment for insomnia, feel free to kind of reach out to me, and I can kind of help support you in finding a provider to do that. So we're closing off with another quote from the firefighter that we heard from at the beginning of our talk today, just to kind of send home this message again, that sleep is really important. And that we need to kind of take it seriously and value it and recognize the impact it has on our physical and mental health, and pause and say, okay, I really haven't thought about my lack of sleep before, but it really does impact my physical health and my quality of life, and I need to start kind of thinking about, making changes to that if I want to stay in this career over a long period of time and remain healthy physically. So this quote says, "It's time to break our cultural values that glorify this deadly addiction to being awake, and begin to value sleep, naps, and healthy practices that support their circadian rhythm. In turn, there will be a substantial decrease in risk for cancer, heart attacks, and propensity for psychological problems. As we make these larger connections on sleep relating to health, and we take action together, we must assert what we know to be true. Healthy sleep habits do not challenge work ethic, but rather enable and support it. Valuing sleep is not weakness, and sleep deprivation is not strength." So again, kind of wrapping up this idea that it's stoic to not need a lot of sleep, or to be okay without getting sleep, or the sleep deprivation somehow makes us stronger. What we know that not to be true. We have enough evidence now to know that it has long-lasting impacts on our physical health and our mental health. And so we need to take it seriously, especially in the field that you're in. And if you're wanting to stay in your field for the rest of your career, thinking about how you can start to prioritize having good sleep habits now can be really helpful for the longevity of your life and also your career. So lastly, I just want to say thank you for your service and sacrifice to our community. Thank you for kind of watching these videos and kind of staying connected with us this way. Please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have questions about anything that we've talked about, if you have concerns about anything that we've talked about, or suggestions for future topics. If you have ideas about things that you feel like you all could benefit from, or learning about different things or different strategies to kind of help, again, kind of increase your quality of life, that is what I'm here to do. And so please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any questions or anything like that. Thank you again for watching today. I hope this was helpful to you, and I look forward to seeing you all again soon.